Good evening. I'm Barbara Burry, a member of Jewish National Fund USA Small Communities Committee. Thank you all for joining us today for a special presentation and discussion on the future of American Jewry, featuring Dr. Ira Sheskin from the University of Miami. Dr. Sheskin will be sharing with us specific points of data from the Pew study, Jewish Americans in 2020. If you have not already downloaded a copy of the presentation deck, you may do so now using the link in the chat box. If you have any questions for our speaker, please place them in the chat box or send them directly to me via chat. We will do our best to get to all of the questions during the Q&A session after the presentation. And now I would like to turn the meeting over to our facilitator, Sam Richardson, our Director of Small Community Outreach at JNF. In addition to his day job with JNF USA, Sam is a social scientist who has spent much of his academic life of the past 20 years researching the American Jewish community, specifically those who live in small communities. Sam?
Thank you very much, Barbara. Welcome, everybody. It is my distinct privilege to introduce Dr. Ira Sheskin, Director of the Jewish Demography Project at the Sue and Leonard Miller Center for Contemporary Judaic Studies at the University of Miami. He's professor of the Department of Geography and Sustainable Development at the same institution and has served on the board of the Association of the Social Scientific Study of Jewry for 15 years. Dr. Sheskin has been the editor, along with my former mentor, Dr. Ira Sheskin, at the University of Connecticut, of the American Jewish Yearbook since 2012. And this publication documents the state of North American Jewry annually and has been published almost continually since 1899. Highly recommended. Dr. Sheskin has completed more than 50 major Jewish community studies for Jewish federations throughout the country. He has recently completed studies in Miami, Broward, Houston, St. Petersburg, Omaha, Indianapolis, and Detroit. And he's currently working on a study of the impact of COVID-19 for UJA Federation of New York. That promises to be a very interesting study. He's also been a consultant to numerous synagogues, Jewish day schools, Jewish agencies, nursing homes, and Jewish community centers throughout the country. In total, he's completed 115 studies for more than 85 Jewish organizations and commercial entities. He's the author of numerous articles in Jewish demography, the Jewish vote, and related topics. And so now please join me in welcoming Dr. Ira Sheskin. Dr. Sheskin, please take it away.
We need to be able to share my screen now, please. And okay, give me a second here. That's the one we want to share. There. Okay, everybody can see the whole screen now. Okay.
We're good.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be with you here tonight to make this presentation. The Pew study, as we call it, has had a tremendous impact on the American Jewish community. Okay. Just a little bit on the methodology. The Pew Research Center is the gold standard for research on religion, ethnicity, and politics. They did this survey using a new technique for Jewish surveys called address-based sampling. They mailed out 340,000 requests to participate, were sent to American households, both Jewish and non-Jewish. 68,400 were completed by both Jews and non-Jews, and 4,700 surveys were from Jews. So we did not rely on mailing lists of synagogues or federations. We did not rely on distinctive Jewish names, that is, calling people who have a last name like Cohen and Levine. These are the topics we're going to look at tonight, although there are other topics covered at the back of the slide deck, which we will not be looking at tonight. You'll notice that in the lower right-hand corner, there is a page number. and a slide number. So if you have questions about a particular slide, you can write down the slide number and use it during the question and answer period. So let's just start with a little bit about demographics. 38% of Jews live in the Northeast, compared to only 17% of all Americans. Jews are just about equal with all Americans on living in the West, but they're much less likely to live in the South as well as the Midwest. 29% of Jewish adults are age 65 and over, compared to only 20% of all US adults. So the Jewish population is an older population compared to all US adults. The oldest group are the conservative Jews, with the median age is 62, and 43% are age 65 and over. The Orthodox, on the other hand, the median age is 35. 35% are age 18 to 29, and only 9% of Orthodox Jews are age 65 and over. For Reform Jews, they're kind of in the middle. They've got 34% elderly, with a median age of 53. 58% of Jews have a college degree or higher, compared to 29% of all US adults. For Jews, 54% have incomes of $100,000 or over, whereas for all US households, that's only 19%. Well-educated, and although we do have some significant poverty in certain areas, particularly in New York, far more wealthy than is the average American household. Now, this is the one slide where we've got some information that's not from the Pew study. It's from Miami, but we have evidence to the effect that I'm going to show you here from several other Jewish communities. If we look at adults under the age of 35, back in 1994, 47% were married. Today, that same age group, it's only 27%. So American Jews, as are all Americans, are getting married later. They're having very few children. Jewish women in the US are averaging 1.5 children each. Now, this is not Miami now, this is the whole country, okay? Orthodox have a fertility of 3.3 children, and the non-Orthodox have 1.4. So having less children, but this also means something else too. If you only have 2 children instead of 3, the time in between which your oldest child enters Hebrew school and your youngest child is bar mitzvahed is shorter. And that helps to explain some of the decline in synagogue membership. Now let's look at the number of American Jews. Pew came up with 7.5 million American Jews, 5.8 million adults, and 1.8 million children. That 7.5 million compares to 2 other numbers. The American Jewish Yearbook in 2019 had 7.3 million. In 2022, we're going to have 7.5 million. Brandeis University uses yet another methodology. They come up with 7.6 million. Really, all 3 methods are in the same ballpark. There appear to be about 7.5 million Jews in the United States. Okay. Here's the growth of the Jewish population over time. This is not from Pew as well. In the early Republic, up until about 1810, there were just a few thousand. Between 1810 and 1880, when Jews came from Central Europe, it increased to 280,000. During the Great Migration out of Eastern Europe, it increased to 3.6 million. Holocaust survivors and the baby boom got us up to 6 million. And then between the 1970 and today, we've gone up now to about 7.5 million. This is actually 2020 data right here. Where did that come from? In part from immigrants from the former Soviet Union. 750,000 Jews in this country now live in households in which an adult, or at least one adult, or at least comes from the former Soviet Union, or is the child of someone who comes from the former Soviet Union. Let's take a look next at Jewish identification. First, 3 out of 4 Jews, when asked, what is your religion, if any, said, I'm Jewish. 27% said atheist, agnostic, nothing in particular. I don't know. Okay. The Jews of no religion increases as age decreases. So it's 13% for the 65 and overs, and it's 40% for age 18 to 29. This, by the way, is not unlike what's happening in the general American population as well. The decrease in religiosity is significant across all religions. The other thing that we can notice here, and you'll see it says no particular branch. There are places we'll call this no particular branch, and other places we'll call it just Jewish. Notice that for the 65 and over population, only 3% of them are Orthodox. And that increases to 17% of the 18 to 29-year-olds. The no particular branch explodes as well. What's lost is that conservative Jewry goes from 25% down to 8%, and Reform from 44% down to 29%. What's happened to adults who had at least one Jewish parent? 48%, my religion is Jewish. 19%, I'm Jewish, but not by religion. 1 out of 5 are now Christian. 7% are now some other faith. 7% are not Jewish and also say they have no religion at all. If we look, though, between 1990 and 2020, let's see what happened. The 1990 data from the National Jewish Population Survey and the 2020 data from Pew. The percentage of Jews calling themselves Orthodox really didn't change very much. Now, the number of Orthodox Jews is up because the number of Jews is up, but the percentage hasn't changed much. The loser here is conservative, which went from 25% down to 17%. We can look at that as another way, too. This goes all the way back to 1800. The orange here is conservative, which in 1950 was 60% of American Jews, and is now down to 17%. The just Jewish, which is the white bar, was just over in 1971. It was just over 10%, and now it's in the 40% range. Among U.S. adults raised Orthodox, 67% are still Orthodox. Conservative has only managed to keep 41% of those raised conservative, and Reform also keeps about 66%. So Orthodox and Reform are both keeping about 2/3 of their people, whereas conservative is only keeping 41% of their people. Notice there's very little movement out of conservative into Orthodox and out of Reform into Orthodox. That is not a big move. We see nice stories in the press about people becoming Baal Teshuvah, right? It's not a big group. People who are not synagogue members, half of them also say they're not Jewish. 36% say they're Reform, but don't belong to a synagogue right now. This Orthodox conservative Reform, by the way, is people's self-identification. It doesn't necessarily mean they belong to a synagogue of that denomination. It's a self-identification variable. Now, we also ask people, how important is religion in your life? And look, for all U.S. adults, it's 41% very important. For Jews, it's only 21% very important. Religion is very important, as we would expect, much higher for the Orthodox than for the conservative, much higher for the conservative than for the Reform, and much higher for the Reform than for the just Jewish. The same thing pattern is seen for being Jewish being very important. And religion being very important and being Jewish very important are two different things. The other thing we can note here is that to those over 50, being Jewish is somewhat more important than it is for those under age 50. People were asked, is being Jewish to you mainly a matter of culture, ancestry, or religion? And people, remember, this was an internet and mail survey, so people could check off 1 to 3 of these. 56% gave an answer that included culture. 52% gave an answer that said included ancestry, and 36% gave an answer that included religion. The percentage of people who said religion and that's it was 11%. This is perhaps one of the most interesting questions and has received an enormous amount of use in press. Each of the items on this chart were given to the respondent and asked, is that an essential part of being Jewish? Important but not essential, or not important? The two big ones here are remembering the Holocaust and leading an ethical and moral life. On the lower end of the scale, having a good sense of humor, being part of a Jewish community, eating traditional Jewish foods, and observing Jewish law are much less essential. Belief in the God of the Bible is 56% among all Americans and only 26% among Jews. Next, let's take a look at Jewish practices and engagement. 17% keep a kosher home. 1 out of 5 go to services at least monthly. Almost 4 out of 10 mark Shabbat in a way that's meaningful to them. Almost half fast on Yom Kippur. Just over 60% either observed a life milestone ritual last year or held or attended a Seder last year. For Seder, it's not that different among the 4 different age groups. It's much higher for in-married households than for intermarried households, although one could look at it and say, wow, almost half of intermarried households did go to a Seder last year. Fasting on Yom Kippur, much higher for Orthodox than conservative, than Reform, than just Jewish. Marking Shabbat, not that much difference among the 4 age groups. Keeping kosher at home. I compare this with what I knew from when I was a college student, let's say. 25% of the 18 to 29-year-olds, that's because that's where almost all the Orthodox are, and it's only 11% for those aged 65 and over. We also some questions were asked about cultural connections. This is often or sometimes, 72% often or sometimes cook or eat Jewish foods. 62% share Jewish culture with non-Jewish friends. 57% visit historic Jewish sites while traveling. Only less than 1 out of 5 do what you're doing right now, which is participate in something Jewish online. And by the way, that didn't change too much with COVID-19. You might think it did, but it in fact didn't. 81% have a menorah, 64% a mezuzah. Hebrew Siddur is 59%, and a Seder plate is 56%. Ownership of a menorah actually increases with age. You might think it would be higher when there are children in the household, but it's higher for those who are older. Next is synagogue membership and attendance. All Americans, 27%, are in religious services at least weekly. That's only 12% for Jews. That is a very big difference. Attending services does not vary by age. It's only 5% for those who are intermarried. Reasons for not going: I'm not religious. I'm just not interested. I express my Judaism in other ways. The 2 other answers that people sometimes guess are the big reasons and aren't nearly as big as the top 3 is it costs too much and I don't feel welcome. Reason I attend: spiritually meaningful, feel a sense of belonging, feel connected to my ancestry and history. Synagogue membership does not vary by age. It's 60% for the unmarried and only 13% for the intermarried. 42% of all married Jews are currently have a non-Jewish spouse. But notice the difference here. If only one parent is Jewish, 82% have a non-Jewish spouse. When both parents are Jewish, it's only about a third. So how many of your parents are Jewish helps to determine whether you marry someone who's Jewish or not. This is not surprising, but the difference is stark. If we look here, and let's just look at the all married Jews bar, that's the light blue. The dark blue is non-Orthodox. But for all married Jews between 2000 and 2009, the marriages that took place then, 45% of Jews married non-Jews. For 2010 to 2020, that went up to 61%. So it is something that continues to increase. 98% of children in in-married households are being raised with some form of Jewish identity. Only 70% in intermarried households are being raised with some form of Jewish identity. How important is it that your grandchildren you have or will have be raised Jewish? It's about a third for all of the age groups. This is the Jewish education that adults had when they were children. 1 out of 4 attended a Jewish day school, and 13% went for 7 years or more. The other one here that I think is particularly interesting is the attended Jewish summer camp, which is 41%. And a number of studies that I and others have done show that attending Jewish summer camp has a significant impact on adult Jewish behaviors. How many of your closest friends are Jewish? 67% said most or some, okay? And 5% said all. None was only 5%. So most Jews have at least some, at least hardly any, rather, close friends. I have a sense of belonging to the Jewish people. Only 14% came out on the negative side of this question. On a sense of belonging to the Jewish people, it is less for those who are younger than for those who are older. I feel a responsibility to help Jews in need around the world. It's 4 out of 5 that said yes, a great deal, or some responsibility. Feeling some responsibility is a little lower for younger people, 75% for the youngest age group. How much do you have in common with Jews in Israel? Only 8% said not at all, nothing, none at all. And 59% said either a lot or have some in common. Having a lot or some in common is higher for Republicans than for Democrats. It's higher, as would be expected, for those who visited Israel rather than those who have never visited Israel. As an Orthodox Jew, I have a lot in common with Jews who are Orthodox, 79%, but they have much less in common with conservative and Reform Jews. Conservative Jews say they have a lot in common with conservative Jews, but not much in common with Orthodox Jews. The Reform Jews have a lot in common with other Reform Jews and less in common with conservative Jews and Orthodox Jews. And those who are just Jewish feel a lot in common with 15% with Reform. Let's take a look now at a few questions about Israel. 46% of American Jews have now visited Israel. 19% one time and 26% more than once. Visited Israel actually doesn't vary by age. Attachment to Israel, only 14% say that they are not at all attached to Israel. Emotional attachment to Israel increases with age. It decreases as you go from Orthodox to conservative to Reform to just Jewish. This is very or somewhat emotionally attached to Israel. Some more, no difference between men and women, higher for Republicans than for Democrats, and higher if you've been to Israel. Caring about Israel is an essential part of being Jewish. We saw the overall result of 45% earlier, but here I've broken it down, and the conservative Jews come out the highest. It is a bit higher as age increases as well. It is a little higher for women than for men. It's higher for Republicans than Democrats. And it's a little higher for those with a high school degree or less. This, of course, is where so many ultra-Orthodox fit, is in the high school or less. If you follow news about Israel, 9 out of 10 American Jews do follow some news about Israel. 14% very closely, 43% somewhat closely. By age, it's highest for those 65 and over. But I can tell you, because I've got classes filled with 18 to 29-year-olds, not only don't they follow news about Israel, they don't follow news about anything. How much have the respondent heard about the BDS movement? 76% have heard something, okay, about BDS. It's higher for those age 50 and over, and it's a bit higher for Republicans than for Democrats. Do you support or oppose BDS? Well, we've got 10% of American Jews who either somewhat support it or strongly support it. So the overall question that we can ask here is it good news for the Jews or bad news for the Jews? And the answer to that question is yes, it's both good news and bad news. There are certainly many more Jews today than we thought, but many are kind of just Jewish. They kind of have a maybe one foot in the door, maybe even just one toe in the door, but still identify. There are signs of both strengths and weaknesses, and the slides are available from both JNF as well as the Berman Jewish Data Bank at jewishdatabank.org. And the Pew Report, if you go to Pew Research Center and put in Jewish and 2020, you'll find the Pew Report. Or you can just click on this link when you get the slide set. So let me stop there and turn the program back over to Sam.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Sheskin. And thank you all for being here. If you have any questions at all for Dr. Sheskin regarding the data that we just reviewed or anything else that might be tangential but is important to you, please feel free to place your question in the chat area and we will do our best to get to all of the questions. Right now, I would like you though to take just a step back and imagine yourself with 1 million other Jewish individuals committed to securing the Jewish future. How are we going to do that? Well, the Jewish Future Pledge is a worldwide movement working to ensure that vibrant Jewish life continues for generations to come. It calls on all Jews to pledge that 1/2 or more of their charitable giving in their estate plan will support the Jewish people and or the state of Israel and thereby spark intergenerational conversations about why the Jewish people matter and how we are going to enable that viability from generation to generation. So whether you're leaving $10 or $10 million to charity in your will, you can be a part of sustaining the Jewish future for generations to come.
We are the heirs of the most influential people the world has ever known. Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest lawgiver in the history of humankind, the descendants of David HaMelech, the greatest religious poet in all of history. The world's first social critics, the first people to speak truth to power. Jews innovate in every single generation, and every one of them maintained that essential Jewish idea that you change the world not by the idea of power, but by the power of ideas.
And that's what Judaism is, that remarkable algorithm that turns Jews into the most resilient, creative, transformative, fate-defying people the world has ever known. Our Jewish story of survival and success is a miracle, and none of it happened by coincidence. If we don't think about the Jewish future now, who will? More and more young people are walking away from Judaism. Jewish organizations are struggling to raise funds and attract the next generation of donors. We must continue to strengthen the bond between Israel and North America.
The good news is that there is something we can do. We have an historic opportunity to write the next chapter of the Jewish story.
Over the next 25 years, an estimated $68 trillion will transfer to the next generation in North America. $6.3 trillion will be allocated to charity. We believe about 20% of that money will be given by Jewish donors. This means that over $1 trillion will be directed to charity by Jewish donors.
But what charities will get this money? We must ensure that a significant percentage of these resources are committed to the Jewish future.
That's the Jewish Future Pledge. It calls on all Jews to pledge that 50% or more of the charitable giving in their estate will support the Jewish people or the State of Israel. That's more than $600 billion. Signing this pledge sends a powerful message to your family, your friends, and future generations about the importance of sustaining the Jewish people. Tell them why the Jewish future matters to you. Sharing your story is the greatest gift you can give. Each of us must do our part.
Together, we must secure the Jewish future.
I signed the Jewish National Fund USA Jewish Future Pledge.
And so please do go to Jewish Future Pledge to sign up. There's no cost. You're just making a commitment between yourself and your estate to ensure that you are going to be part of the Jewish future. And notice we saw Barbara Burry's picture on the last end of the film there. Well, we do have some questions, and please feel free to, there's still time to put up a question. Dr. Sheskin, looking at the data as a whole, given the historical growth of the American Jewish population, what are the expectations for the future just in terms of numbers? And unfortunately, you're muted. There you go.
Yes, that's one of the most unmute. That's one of the most difficult questions to answer, because as my friend Sergio Della Pergola said, if he were asked that question in 1935, who could have predicted the Holocaust, right? And so that is a difficult question. Look, long term, we have certainly been losing more people to assimilation than we're gaining through Jews by choice. And in Israel, you have the highest fertility rate among Israeli Jews, even leaving out the Orthodox, than any other developed country in the world, the number of children per woman. But here in the United States, as we saw in one of the slides, there's only 1.5 children per woman, and not all of those children are being raised Jewish. Now, in order for people to not decline, women have to average 2.1 children each, and we're only averaging 1.5. So between the low fertility rate and the large percentage of elderly, it's likely you'd have to believe that this is going to go down, the number of Jews, even though we've been increasing. But as I think I said, I think a big part of that increase is all of the hundreds of thousands of Jews we got from the former Soviet Union. A little of it is, Jews from places like Iran who've come here, Jews who've come here from South America. We have about 300,000 Israelis in this country now. Not 1 million, by the way, it's 300,000. Okay. And all of that have contributed to some increasing numbers. But that's not going to continue forever. Right.
Thank you. That gives some clarity there. And moving to the specific tales of the increase and decrease, why do you think it is that the younger generations, the latest generations, are moving towards those two ends, towards orthodoxy and to none?
The country is moving towards the two ends.
Okay.
And that's why, just politically and economically. Economically, the rich are getting richer and the poor are not getting richer. Politically, some people are moving to the right and other people are moving to the left. I think orthodoxy provides people with a real sense of community, which you can't get probably in any other way. And the loss of people to that just Jewish category, that's what's happening in America. Okay, the numbers that you saw for Jews under age 18 to 29 and for Jews overall of having no religion pretty much matches what's going on in America as a whole. Religion is becoming more and more of a hard sell. Just in Europe is being called the post-Christian Europe. You've got more people in France in the mosques on Friday than you have in the churches on Sunday. And here in the United States, we're headed in that direction as well. Religion simply being a difficult sell in a more scientific world. One advantage that we have as a Jewish community over, let's say, Lutherans and Presbyterians, is that, you know, if you stop going to church, you kind of really cease to be a Lutheran. You haven't been to church in 40 years. You haven't been to synagogue in 40 years, you're still a Jew, because being a Jew is both a religious group and an ethnic group. And some people identify ethnically and other people identify religiously, and some people identify as both.
Right. That's a good, concise presentation on that very complex question. Thank you. And moving back, though, to the population estimates, we have a question as to why there's a 1.5 million person discrepancy between 3 sources versus Dr. Della Pergola.
Well, in part because in all my conversations with Sergio Della Pergola, I haven't been able to convince him. Okay. In fact, I have a column in E-Jewish Philanthropy today, Ira Sheskin and I, and Arnie's on someplace. And Arnie, if you want to pipe in, just wave it at Sam, okay? Or send him something in the chat. I'd love to have you participate. You know, Sergio wants to count as not Jewish some of the people who Pew counted as Jewish. Okay, these are people who, when asked, what is your religion, said something like none. But when asked, do you consider yourself Jewish for any reason, such as ethnically, culturally, or by ancestry, they said yes. And those folks who have only one Jewish parent, so they fit that category, but they have only one Jewish parent, he does not want to include them as part of what he calls the core Jewish population of the United States. Okay, but I think it's fair to say that I haven't done a survey of this, but you know, in talking with other members, other social scientists of American Jewry, that everybody else says those folks should count. Okay, those folks should count as Jewish, and we are counting them as Jewish. And then you look at those folks, and which I did in my article in E-Jewish Philanthropy today, 1/4 of them had a bar mitzvah. I mean, you have all kinds of data that say these folks still have a toehold. What I think this expression in Yiddish is a pintele yid. Arnie, you know Yiddish better than I hope I said that right. Okay, so you know, that's why we come up with 7.5. Now, in the American Jewish Yearbook, which Arnie and I both edit, we have a 100-page article on the number of Jews in the United States. And what we do in there is we, with the help from Jewish Federations of North America and other sources, we have estimates for 900 Jewish communities in the United States and parts thereof. You add them together for 2022, you're going to get 7.5 million. Exactly equal to the 2019 Pew number. Now, Brandeis University uses yet another methodology to get the number of American Jews. What they're doing is they're looking at about 90 different surveys that have been done in the past 7 years that ask a question about religion. So it could be something done by Gallup or Harris or the National Opinion Research Center or Pew, et cetera. They come up with 7.6 million Jews. So we have 3 methods, the Brandeis method, the Yearbook, and Pew. Ain't none of them no good, okay? They all have significant problems. Yet we're comforted by the fact that they all have approximately the same number. You know, if one was coming out with 10 million, and another with 7, and another with 3, we would go, hey, right, something's wrong here. But when they're all coming out with basically the same number of Jews in the country, then we can say that it sounds to us like this is about right.
Right. That makes sense. And looking towards the younger set, we've got 2 questions that are interestingly related. Ren is asking, if synagogue affiliation is roughly consistent across ages, why don't we see more Jews age 18 to 30 in our synagogues? But then Elizabeth, she makes a statement in her Sephardic congregation, they do. So might there be some distinctions between Sephardic and American Ashkenaz that are not necessarily reflected in this data?
Well, they're reflected in the data in the sense that Sephardic Jews are about 10% of America, Sephardic Mizrahi. They are reflected in the overall. Now, the Pew data is an incredibly rich data set. I don't know. I served, by the way, on the advisory committee for Pew in 2013 and 2019, as well as for the National Jewish Population Survey in 1990 and 2000. Okay. And I don't know exactly what the Pew study cost, but knowing what these things cost, the Pew 2020 study, I would imagine comes in under $2 million, but not by all that much. So one of the things that can be done with those data is to compare Sephardic Jews with Ashkenazi Jews. Only that's one of hundreds of things we haven't done with that data yet. Now, quite a number of the Sephardic Jews, or Mizrahi Jews, if you were to look, for example, at the Iranians in Los Angeles, they're first-generation immigrants who are always more religious. And going to synagogue services for them is an expression of the fact that they want to be with other Iranian Jews and eat some of the foods that they grew up eating in Iran, right? Okay. So I think that's part of it. Why aren't the younger people coming? For the same reasons I think that I presented earlier about the fact that they don't identify their religion so much as being Jewish. They have fewer children, so they're members for a shorter period of time. I think that plays a role as well. Now, one could say that most synagogues really don't program very much for 18 to 29-year-old singles. And such a large percentage of 18 to 29-year-olds are singles. Singles don't join synagogues in large numbers, do they? Right. Okay. Of any age, really. They're much less likely to join.
Very good point. And so that brings out a social psychological concept of affiliation, not necessarily matching behavior.
Well, one of the things we know about the millennial generation, okay, is they're much less likely to join anything. Everybody reports that, not just Jewish organizations. Right. And so they're not joining lots and lots of different things. But it is interesting that almost all of the 4,700 respondents, in addition to saying they were Jewish or Jews by religion or Jews of no religion, almost all of them are currently doing something Jewish, even if it's really minimal. Okay? Which
is good news.
Yeah.
So as you have 40 years of experience in Jewish demography, what about this data set surprised you the most?
Oh, really tough question to answer because there's so many things that surprised me. I suppose one of them is that not feeling welcome in the synagogues wasn't a bigger answer than it was.
Oh, okay.
Which means that simply giving out green cups to those people who are there for the first time and are visitors, and then having members of your board go over and welcome them is probably not the answer to getting large numbers of new members. The average American Jew just sees no reason to say the Aleinu once a week. That's what it is. They may be spiritual, they may be involved, they may be very pro-Israel. In fact, Arnie and I have a book coming out. Arnie, I hope you're working on it while you're listening. Arnie and I have a book coming out called Jewish Options, which looks at Orthodox, conservative, Reform, just Jewish, those who are secular in the sense that they're Jews in what might be called the Democratic Party with a menorah. They express their Jewishness through their tikkun olam, right, and have a little bit of cultural Jewishness in them. So there's all kinds of different ways to be Jewish. And one way that lots of people don't find anything important in is sitting through a service. It's just that simple, Sam.
In that case, as you view the data, what practice or attitude has the most potential for strengthening individual Jewish identity and increasing the chances of the next Jewish generation having a resilient corporate identity?
Well, let me talk about two of them there, okay?
Sure.
For many years, the Holocaust has been used as a way of connecting people, right? And, you know, I'm a member of the Holocaust Museum and I go to Holocaust events and et cetera. And it is very important. But a professor at Florida International University once said, you know, do kids really want to join something that's a big loser? And, you know, maybe there should be a little more emphasis on the joy of being Jewish than the oi of being Jewish, is what he said. And I think there's something to that. I'm also convinced that certain activities that we do with our kids, certainly day school seems to work at creating Jewish adults. Jewish sleepaway camp works at creating Jewish adults. All the data show that even controlling for things like age and sex and level of education and other Jewish activities, those who went to Jewish sleepaway camp are more Jewish as adults than those who didn't go to Jewish sleepaway camp. Getting people involved in Hillel or Chabad on the college campus during those years is also important. Okay? So those are some of the things that I think can help right there. Okay?
And then moving that more specifically, since the Jewish National Fund is the organization working to build and secure the land of Israel for the people of Israel, what aspects of Jewish life will help increase that support over the new generations?
Well, you know, one of the things that I find interesting, first of all, is, you know, I teach at the University of Miami, as you know, and there is a lot of interest among the current younger people in environmental issues.
Right.
And that's something that JNF could probably sell to younger people. You know, we have a number of organizations like the Jewish World Service that, as Jews, provides basically charitable work, philanthropic work in less developed countries.
Right.
Younger people, you know, they'll be happy to do it as Jews. And I think that's something as well. So maybe environmental projects in Israel, where from here in the United States, you can send people to Israel for environmental and ecological types of participation.
I resonate with that answer in what I found in our small communities. But to not to take a lazy perspective, but the general sociology has been that as people in general and Jews get older, we tend to be more religious, as was pointed out, and we have also seen older generations be more Israel connected, Israel positive. Do you anticipate that will happen with the millennials and Gen Z?
It always has happened. We have a special issue of the journal Contemporary Jewry. It's now about 10 years old. I wrote one article in it. Ira Sheskin wrote another. There were about 12, 15 people who wrote articles. And I read them all. And the conclusion I've come to is this. If you look at overall support of Israel, you know, emotional attachment, nothing political here, among American Jews, going back to the 60s till today, the overall level of people who are very attached, or whatever the categories are, hasn't really changed. Now, go back to, let's say, the 1970s. In the 1970s, people were pulling their hair out because the younger Jews were less attached than the older Jews. We're still doing that. But the people who are older Jews now used to be younger Jews, which means that as you age, right, and you lose the fact that Israel isn't perfect, but you can still love it, okay, then they become more attached over time. So I'm not all that worried, but I would say that without birthright, things might be very different, right? A lot of the work done by Len Sachs at Brandeis University, comparing those who went with birthright with those who wanted to go, but through a lottery, there weren't enough spaces, they couldn't be taken, shows that those who had a birthright experience are much more Jewishly connected than those who didn't have the birthright experience. So Birthright is another program that needs support. And I know when I'm teaching courses, and I've taught one on the Middle East for years, I've taught one on Jewish geography, I can tell when some of the Jewish students in my class have been on Birthright. They're really gung-ho about things. Okay?
Right. Good point. And I would also point out that Jewish National Fund has the Alexander Muss High School in Israel with semester programs, mini semester programs, as well as summer and winter break programs. We also have a gap year program, Dream Israel, where kids can get up to $7,500 scholarship. And we also have a Plant Your Way, where even as grandparents, from the day you have a brand new baby grandson or granddaughter, you can start putting money towards their Israel trip. So there's a lot of opportunities for the older generations to help encourage the younger generations to have that time in Israel that will strengthen those connections. Thank you for that. And then so we don't have any more questions in the chat, but my final question is for you. What is the best news? I asked you what surprised you, and now to you, what is the best news from this data that we can take into our kishkas and come out of this session with a smile?
Oh, well, I mean, it has to be that the number is 7.5 million, and it certainly didn't go down. Okay, that has to be about the best news. I would think that the news that I see as most of the biggest problem is that although we have many intermarried Jews who are well connected with the community and they're good Jews and et cetera, the intermarriage rate continues to increase. And on everything we look at, intermarried couples are less involved than in-married couples. And, you know, the question that we face, of course, is we have limited time and we have limited resources. Do we put money toward trying to get more intermarried couples involved? Or do we try to get more in-married couples who are just barely involved, more involved? And that's kind of an overall philosophical question. I think it's probably the latter. Okay, trying to get the less involved, more involved, and trying to pull people out who are not at all involved and get them involved. I think the latter is harder than trying to increase the level of involvement.
So there's certainly an opportunity here for everybody on this call to work towards strengthening our community as a whole, as well as working towards bringing more of those younger generations into a stronger, more resilient identity for the future. And you're doing, thank you for the work that you're doing in the classroom and for the work that you've done, helping the Pew organization to come out with a good survey and good data, and for being with us this evening to share with us the important points that we need to be considering and working on in our daily lives as a Jewish National Fund, and even people who are remotely related to the Jewish community can work towards strengthening these connections internally as Jewish Americans and with Israel. And so again, thank you, Dr. Sheskin. And now I'd like to turn over to Alan Lubell.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, what a great program. I think you'll all want to join Sam in thanking Dr. Sheskin for his presentation tonight and sharing his scholarship with us. To introduce myself, I'm Alan Lubell from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also a member of the Jewish National Fund USA Small Communities Committee. I want to thank each of you participants for joining us this evening for this presentation and discussion on the future of American Jewry. After all, we are all part of shaping that future. Someone from our committee, from the Small Communities Committee team, will be in touch with you in the next few days to get your thoughts on this program and invite you to partner with the Jewish National Fund in the future of Israel and Zionism. And of course, as part of that contact, they'll give you an opportunity to make a financial contribution to support the Jewish National Fund, to provide programs like this, and to support our programs in Israel. If you have a question that we didn't answer, have a chance to answer, we'll do our best to follow up. If you think of a new question, something that came up or that you think of later, we'd be about the Pew data or about the work of the Jewish National Fund. We're happy to get that information to you. If you want to know more about making a connection to Israel through the Jewish National Fund, please reach out to Dr. Sam Richardson, our Small Communities Director, at srichardson@jnf.org. Thank you and good night. That concludes our program.